Hello and good afternoon. Welcome to the Progressive Pathways to Post-Secondary Success Landscape Scan of Career Pathway Programs. This is the first webinar meeting of the advisory board that we have convened to help assist us shape out this project. I want to first introduce my colleagues that are here in the room with me. This is Mary Kay Devine from Women Employed. I'm joined by my colleague Sarah Labdy, and we have a few members of the Education Systems Center at Northern Illinois University team, John Furr, who will be my co-presenter today, Andrea Messing-Massey, and Emily Ruska. So I'm just going to go over a couple housekeeping items to make sure we're all on the same page with our webinar service. We will keep all the lines muted, but we will be doing a lot of interactions with you throughout the webinar. We have multiple polls. We have a chat box that is open. You can send a chat or question to me. Feel free to make notes and comments throughout the webinar so that your ideas are not lost. And then we're going to sort of gauge our time after we go through the presentation on the draft of core elements and see if we have some time to open up those lines, and at that time I could tell you how to unmute yourself. So again, please use the chat window. If you have any other issues, you can raise your hand or just send a note to me and I can try to handle your issues. I also want to make sure, and I put it in the chat box, the webinar service has awesome customer service. So if you have any issues with sound, being able to see the slides, their number is in the chat box. They answer within 2 rings and they will help you out. So last but not least, we are recording the webinar, and that's part of the reason why we put you on mute, because we know nobody likes to listen to dishwashing, dog walking, or hair drying. So we will download that webinar today and post it to the Women Employed YouTube page and circulate the link as soon as possible. So let's dive right in. Today's meeting goals. Maybe John will advance my meeting goals. All right. We just wanted to make sure you were all on your toes. Today's meeting goals for today, like we said in our invitation, is to establish a threshold definition that promotes a common understanding of quality career pathways and systems while aligning to existing definitions, plans, and guidelines. And literally before we dialed in today, John and I were just saying this is not starting with a blank page. We are not reinventing the wheel. We're starting from a really strong foundation, and as you saw in our registration questions, not only the information and resources we have at hand, but really tapping into your expertise in the career pathways landscape. We also, in the second part of today's webinar, will be identifying information providers. So who are other people that we as the project team should contact? Lists, directories, people. So even as you're thinking and we're going through the different slides and pieces of the conversation, this is a great place where you can dump information into the chat box that will help us figure out a baseline for further analysis in the region. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to John Furr, and he'll start to share some of the background information on this project.
Great. Thanks, Mary Kay. Good afternoon, everyone. We really appreciate your time this afternoon. I want to take some time to give you some background on this project and to talk about the approach that we're taking to it before we really dive into the substance around the threshold definition. So first of all, in terms of the background for ProPath, the ProPath scan within the Chicago region is a project that's being led and supported by the Chicagoland Workforce Funders Alliance, and CWFA collaborates with employers and other workforce stakeholders to increase employment, earnings, and racial equity for underprepared workers in the Chicago region. Recently, CWFA has joined with education funders to create a new fund, the ProPath Fund, which is really focused on this concept of progressive pathways and how do we expand opportunities to access those pathways, and importantly with this project, how do we think about the transparency of those pathways. And the working definition of progressive pathways that the CWFA and ProPath team started with was a definition that you can see here about allowing individuals to alternate between and combined periods of education and training and employment, thereby progressively building toward college and career success over time. So the landscape scan is the first initiative and investment of the ProPath Fund. And why do they think that this is important? because there was really no existing baseline set of information that's suitable for anyone's use within the region in terms of what career pathway programs are out there. And the idea is that eventually the scan can be a tool for policymakers, for funders, both government and philanthropy, for educators to create networks, and I think the eventual goal would be to have a tool that can be useful for youth as well who are exploring career pathway tools to have access to information about career pathways that are throughout the Chicago region. Through a competitive request for proposal process, we were very fortunate to be selected to lead this project. And as you can see here, we have a team with 3 entities that's supporting the work. We'll kind of start down in the bottom left-hand corner with our center. Education Systems Center at NIU has been leading some of the work around Illinois pathways since that initiative kicked off in 2010, working at the state level, but also supporting a number of regions throughout the state, particularly through our efforts with the Illinois 60 by 25 network. And we've also been involved with the state's work through the Illinois Longitudinal Data System, so we have a strong understanding of the types of data resources that are out there to support this work. Within NIU, we've partnered with the Center for Governmental Studies, who has deep expertise in applied research, analysis, and being able to compile and synthesize data from a number of different sources, which is really going to be critical for this project. And lastly, we're thrilled to be able to partner with Women Employed as part of this project, who for more than 10 years has been a nationally recognized leader on career pathway programs, who has extremely deep expertise in adult education and bridge models, and was also a member of the Illinois team who worked directly to help shape the Alliance for Quality Career Pathways framework. So as we all came together and we were able to think about our strategy for the scan, there were really 4 key questions that I'm going to talk through with you in the next few minutes about that shaped our approach. So first of all, we had to address this question of what's the Chicago region. Secondly, what's a career pathway program? And third, once we define those, how do we get information on these programs? And lastly, who else do we need to advise us? So to jump into this first question, what is the Chicago region? For our goals, for our approach, we wanted to make sure that we were staying aligned with state systems and programs. So we adopted an expansive definition for the Chicago region that's aligned with the Northeast Economic Development Region definition that's in the state WIOA Unified Plan. And as you can see from this graphic, so that region includes 10 counties in all of Chicagoland. You can begin to see the overlap that there's 7 LWIAs. There's all or part of 17 community college districts, especially if you count that little sliver for the Illinois Valley region. So this is an expansive task that we've kind of carved out for ourselves for the definition of the Chicago region. But we felt that it was critical to take that approach to make sure that the work that we're doing can align with how the state is thinking about its regional approaches and its funding streams for career pathways through WIOA and through other mechanisms. So the next question we had to tackle is, what's a career pathway program? And what are those programs that we should think about, including within the scan? One of the issues that we needed to tackle as we try to move from definitions of career pathways to actually getting something objective enough to say whether or not a particular program should be counted is the fact that a lot of definitions that are out there, I'm going to use a very technical term, are fuzzy. So, there's no, the language is kind of loose. It's not very clear about what should or should not be counted. So part of what we were trying to tackle with this is how do we take those definitions, think about ways that we can tighten them up to make them more objective so we could actually get to a workable definition for counting purposes. And we really had kind of 3 sources that I'll talk through that are shown here. So really starting out with WIOA being a foundational definition. The new federal law is the first federal legislation to actually have a statutory definition of career pathways. And there are 7 criteria that are within WIOA, some of which, again, are a little bit fuzzy. But we were incorporating those into our analysis, as well as looking at how career pathways were fleshed out within the WIOA state plan, and also the recommendations from the WIOA Youth Task Force. The second big area that we drew from within this work is the Alliance for Quality Career Pathways, and really diving into their essential features and the descriptions of pathways as being well-connected and transparent with multiple entry and exit points, looking at the criteria and indicators for quality systems. It has strong emphasis on partnerships, and also particularly ensuring that employers are at the table, and that there was collaboration on resources and a focus on data and shared metrics. So that analysis from the AQCP was really informing our approach as well. And then we had this other category. So we've done a pretty comprehensive review of the Pathways to Results work from OCCRL, the University of Illinois, at the State Perkins Grant Guidelines for CTE programs of study, at the Accelerating Opportunity Program models, at the Pathways to Prosperity Network definitions, and some of the linked learning work within California and some other models. So we're also looking through those models to say, are there certain elements that we might want to emphasize more in this definition that can help inform our standard baseline from WIOA and from AQCP. And it was very affirming for us when you all were very appreciative of the survey responses that you provided when you registered. That was great information for us, and it was good to see some confirmation of the approach in terms of you all using many of these same definitions. So the next question we had to tackle was, okay, once we know what a career pathway program is or the elements around it, how do we begin to obtain information on them? And we're taking a three-step approach within this project, and one thing we should mention is that the project's on a fast timeline. So we're trying to work through these 3 steps and to get our final report out by the end of this calendar year, by mid-November. But the steps that we have laid out, first of all, really starting with descriptive data. So we want to pull in all the program data sets that we can get our hands on with as much information as possible from state and federal agencies, from local program administrators, from LWIAs, from the Education for Employment system, from community colleges, and from funders of any programs that could potentially begin to meet the definition of a career pathway program. But one thing we completely understand is that those data sets are not going to tell us by themselves whether or not a particular program meets the definition that we set out. It might give us some information, so it might, because we know of a particular funding stream that applies to a program, that might help us to understand some of the requirements that are associated with that funding stream, but it's not going to go as deep as we need it to start to think about what should be included and what shouldn't be. So our next step is, once we have the descriptive data, is to get out a survey to those programs where we can dive deeper. We can really begin to scratch beneath the surface about how those programs meet these various elements. And we can also get some other information that we're interested in about capacity issues of these programs and what challenges that they're seeing. So that'll be the next step once we have those descriptive data sets, is to go through a survey process. And lastly, we are wanting to further contextualize that information through sub-regional meetings. So our plan includes having 4 meetings within the city, within suburban Cook County, 1 in Lake County, and 1 in DuPage County, where we can really contextualize the information that we've obtained and get feedback from practitioners. And we will be reaching out to all of you, both to involve you within those meetings and to get some input from you about who we should be including within those meetings. So our last question: whose input and engagement do we need? And so in this political season, I really want to call upon you as an American, but just as importantly as a career pathway expert, so that we can unite together around a common definition of career pathway programs. So many of you might realize that I have been watching the DNC conference the last few nights. But regardless, we now want to turn it over to Mary Kay, who's going to dive in a little bit more deeply to explain the role that we're hoping that the advisory board can play as we move forward with this project.
Thank you, John. I feel like there should be like some inspirational video or something that we played as a segue, or have Alicia Keys sing my entrance song or something. So here is a list of the advisory board members. And you can see we've tried to be really intentional about having a balance of, representatives from K through 12, post-secondary, adult education, various state agencies. Because there's been so much work and excellent partners from across the country, we have national experts who we really appreciate have taken the time to, add your expertise and share your time with us here in Illinois. So this is a snapshot of the advisory board members. We will circulate this as well as the draft Career Pathways document that you received in your reminder email, and do that out as a push to the follow-up from the webinar when we send out the recording. So you'll have a good sense of who are some of the other folks on this list. And we have really great participation today. I think the entire list might be 30, and it looks like there's about 23 folks who are available today, and we know a few people sent their regrets because it's also vacation season. So why don't we go ahead and just, this is echoing some of the messages that we had sent out in the first invitation email, because we wanted to forecast, like John said, it's a pretty ambitious timeline to do this work. So clearly we're here on the phone today. We're looking for the next touch point that will probably be a more personalized touch point. And so one of the project team members will be reaching out to you, phone, email, we'll figure it out. But we're going to be, incorporating the feedback from today, developing a program survey that then we'll use to obtain information, just like what John was saying, on capacity, what's working, strengths, challenges. And so before we deliver that survey and engage the field, we'd love to get your input on that. And so once we wrap up today's call and compare our calendars, we'll start scheduling with you. And then in October, realizing that we do have a mix of, city, regional, state, and national supporters on this advisory board, we'll figure out a way to engage and share with you the data that we collect through the survey and the conversations with programs. And so we definitely want, your help on interpreting and looking at the analysis, the initial analysis of the data that we collect. So we know that not everyone will be able to gather in person, so we're more than willing to figure out some kind of blended conversation with you all. So let's go ahead, like John said in his comments, I'm a sucker for a Wordle, so I had to take your responses to your registration questions and just sort of put them up here. And while this is up here, you can tell that career clearly was the most frequently used word. There were strong themes. So I was telling John when we pulled the summary data from the registration and I was working on this piece of art, I think we're starting on the same page. So clearly different people brought different lenses depending on, what corner of the world and what's your primary population with whom you work, but just as a sample to throw things out there. And as I'm talking, I think this is another great opportunity that, like, as you're looking at some of these words or hearing some of the phrases that I share, please dump additions into the chat box. So if you hear something that sparks an idea, this is a great point of fleshing out some of your initial concepts or doubling down on the information you shared. So a representative from Chicago Public Schools provided the feedback that the definition they're using is integrating academic, social, emotional, and technical skills. Career pathways provide the training and skills necessary to enter and be successful in high demand and growing job fields. Quite a few people responded with the Alliance for Quality Career Pathways, that framework that had initially been developed by CLASP going all the way back to 2013, and realizing it was a national effort that predated WIOA, and then as the federal legislation was passed and put into law, I just really compliment CLASP's ability to marry their framework with the federal legislation. So quite a few folks from across the turf made those comments and commented and doubled down on the AQCP definition. Another set of thoughts that the career pathway clusters and career pathway definitions can be used to support getting to a shared vision by focusing on the key components. And luckily, this is what we'll be talking about today: partnerships, sector focus, designed for access and success, innovative instructional delivery models, comprehensive supports, robust formative and summative measurement. Some folks from the CTE world made the point that, while we might not always use the same words, we're definitely on the same page with career clusters and career pathways, and focusing, supporting our students on the group of occupations and industries and building on those foundational skills and knowledge so that they can pursue high demand and high wage careers. The word connection was probably used 100 times, and so it's really trying to figure out how we as program providers and advocates and agency representatives help students understand the connections between various occupations and connections to progressive career trajectories and the necessary skills that they need to be successful. And then we also appreciate the folks that recognize it's a work in progress. So many of you said, I can't wait to see what the definition is, or I'm happy to help. But before I turn it over to John, I do just encourage you, we're going to be entering into a really, kind of like rapid-paced, engaging time using polls, and I hope that you'll use the chat bar to flesh out your opinions. So with that, I hand it back to John.
Great. Thanks, Mary Kay. So in this next section, we're going to be taking quite a bit of time here to walk through our initial attempt to define core elements of career pathways for purposes of the scan. And one thing that I'll encourage you to take a look at, Mary Kay had emailed out a one-page front and back sheet that has these definitions listed. So it might be worthwhile to have that close by as well, just to refer to as we're going through this. We'll also have the information up on the slides. But as we talked about before, again, these were not elements that we drew out of thin air or that we personally thought were important things. It was really working from those sources before, and hopefully will look very familiar as you reflect on your own career pathways work. So there's 8 core elements. We're going to walk through each one. When we think about the grouping of them collectively, I'll say that really the first 3 around partnership, sector focus, and progressive design really get into this question of how are career pathways structured, who's at the table, again, what's that particular sector focus. Then the progressive design, as well as the career focused instruction and work-based learning and participant supports, really speak to, again, what are those participant experiences as they're navigating and progressing through a career pathway program. What does it mean to the individuals that are receiving that training and that support? And the last 2 elements are really about, you may not need them to establish a career pathway program, but you need them for a program to be viable. So we felt it was important to include elements that reflected the need for long-term viability through measurement and through having sustainable funding sources. And so in the next session, as you look at the handout, as you walk through these, you'll see that although we have common definitions, we also have specific criteria by primary program focus area, because we also understand that we do have many career pathway programs that may originate at the high school level, others that may be more focused on adult ed or bridge program or apprenticeship models, and others that may originate more at the post-secondary level and reach back down. And we felt that it was important as we went through these core elements to define specific criteria that relates to where that primary program focus is. So you'll see that as we go through the definitions. And what we're going to be doing, just so you're ready, as Mary Kay said, this is really about engagement. I'm going to be walking through these definitions, and then we're going to stop at the end of each one. And we're going to do a poll. And you're going to have 4 options for that poll in terms of each of these elements. Your first option for the poll is that you can say you love it. We nailed it. We got it absolutely right. There may be very few things that it doesn't really need change, perhaps a little wordsmithing, but in that it's great. At the opposite end of the spectrum, you'll have an option to say you hate it. We really just were off the mark. This element doesn't belong, or it's just so completely garbled and misconstrued that you're almost embarrassed that we're putting it up on the screen in front of you. But between those 2 points, we're going to have a couple of other options. One is needs a little work, so generally on the right track, but we need to be thinking about reconfiguring some of our approaches or adding more, or needs a lot of work. So you might agree that this element belongs, but how it's framed again, needs substantial work for us to get it to the right place. And you're all going to be forced to respond for one of those 4 options. But more importantly than that gut check, you need to use the comment box. So especially if you're in anything besides loving it, we really want to know why you think it needs a little work or a lot of work, or why you hate it. So again, get your typing fingers ready, and off we go. So for the first element, one of our core elements is around partnerships. This concept that partners need to be at the table, planning and committing to leveraging resources, that they're adjusting existing or adopting new policies to support the pathway, and employers are playing a leadership role within the partnership. And as we've thought about this and looked at the definitions, we feel strongly that if you are just a high school offering a program, or just a nonprofit, or just a community college on your own, you're not offering a career pathway program. You have to have partners at the table for it to constitute a career pathway program. And as you look at the specific criteria, so at the high school level, there has to be a partnership with post-secondary education and at least one employer in a leadership role. And as we walk through the other elements, there may be other partners that are needed to support different aspects of the work, again, whether that be work-based learning, an intermediary that helps coordinate that work, or participant supports, but other partners to be at the table as needed. So when you move up the continuum looking at adult education and bridge programs and apprenticeships, again, that core need for at least one employer partner in a leadership role, and then including other partners as necessary to address the remaining core elements. So to address the GED equivalency component, does there need to be a partner in place there, or for other participant supports with community-based organizations? And lastly, when we get to credit-bearing post-secondary, which could, in our mind, either be a community college or potentially a four-year institution, there has to be at least one partnership with secondary education, and also at least one employer in a leadership role, kind of a consistent requirement, and again, that requirement for including other partners as necessary. So with that, Mary Kay, we're gonna pause and we're gonna throw open the survey and get your reactions.
Okay, it looks about half of you. Just go with your gut. All right, we're going to close the poll in another second. Love it, hate it, needs a little work, needs a lot of work. And like I broadcasted out to all of you, if you do think needs a little work or a lot of work and you want to make a comment in real time, we'd love to see it in the chat box. Oh, okay, we just got some helpful feedback from one of the participants, just asking for a little bit more of a pause between John's presentation and then just keeping the slide up before we do the poll. So we'll just give it a little bit more time on the next one. I'm going to skip to the results on this one. All right, so it needs a little work, and many of you love it. I'm seeing some other comments coming in as far as asking questions, what qualifying as an employer partner, leadership role needs more definition, so this is great. So just keep typing, and then we'll go back to John, and we'll be sure, if you don't have the opportunity to have the handout in front of you or up on another window, we'll just leave it up for a little bit longer after John makes the presentation, and then we'll switch to the poll. But thank you. That was a good practice round for feedback.
Great. And I would say, keep making those comments, even if we are past beyond the particular element and you have a thought and comment that you want to add, just, doing your comment this relates to partnerships, because we'll be able to track that, and it's incredibly valuable feedback for us that we'll have from your input. So thank you all, and again, we'll make sure that we pause as we walk through this. So the second core element, looking at sector focus. So really looking at how pathways are using data and information to determine an industry sector focus that helps to contextualize the learning and also target state and regional economic development goals. We generally, as you look at the way that we have the specific criteria, the first criteria is the same across all three areas. Really thinking that labor market information, regional economic development goals, and employer input need to be used to define both the industry sector focus and the occupational specific pathways that are included within the program. And I would say, within high school area as an internal team, we argued a little bit about whether or not that should be the same criteria as the other areas, so interested in your feedback on that point. And then within the secondary, we also wanted to be more specific about the need for a broad introduction to a particular industry sector that then branches off to more specific occupational or occupational cluster areas. Again, thinking that may be less important where students are coming in with more information and more direction in the other two areas. So we're going to pause, and we're going to let you digest, and then we will open up the poll after that.
Okay, I'm going to move to the sector focus poll in just a second, and it'll be the same 4 options: love it, hate it, needs a little work, or a lot of work. The comments that have been coming in the chat bar are very specific, right on point. So we're going to go to the poll now. So we'll just give you guys a few more seconds. Again, it looks about half the folks have responded, and we just love to hear from all of you if possible on the sector focus core element that John just presented. There are kind of 2 questions that have come up. So it might be easy if you have the document, even if you have a chance to just print it off and run and grab it off your copy tray. It was attached to the webinar reminder this morning, and then I had sent it out sort of late in the day yesterday once it was finalized. So there's kind of 2 emails in your inbox from us where you could download the document and then follow along. And I do want to make the comment that all of this, I mean, the beauty about doing a webinar is in addition to the recording, we're also able to pull all of the commentary and chats into our report. And so the project team will be looking at all the various formats of your feedback, and including polls. And then this gives us a chance between the chats and the poll responses that we can decide if we need to follow up with you personally. So I'm going to close this poll. Thank you for your feedback. It looks like this one needs a little bit more work, and the comments continue to come in the chat bar. So if there are any other specific points on the sector focus draft core element, please put them right in the chat box, because it seems like there's some work to do on this one. All right. Do you want me to go ahead to the next one, John?
Absolutely. Great. So the next element for progressive design is capturing some of the components from WIOA and AQCP and others about how do we think about multiple entry and exit points and opportunities for ongoing advancement. So we're looking at enabling participants to gain entry to or advance within a given career cluster, and also to facilitate efficient transitions to continuing education, again, that it's not leading to a stopping point that can allow for ongoing advancement. As we look at the specific criteria for the various levels, as we've set them out here for your consideration, at the secondary level, we're making sure that pathways are structured to provide students the opportunity to meet a full range of post-secondary eligibility requirements, including for AA and AAS degrees, for bachelor's degrees, for apprenticeship and workforce training programs. So those are all considered as part of the design. And also suggesting that there should be the opportunity to earn at least one industry-recognized credential prior to high school graduation. So this concept that if a student is going directly into the workforce, or they're going to be working while they're continuing to pursue post-secondary education, that they should have that industry-recognized credential to support that. As we move into the adult ed, bridge and apprenticeship work and credit-bearing post-secondary area, the first element for each really drawn directly from WIOA, the expectation that it does lead to at least one recognized post-secondary credential. Within the second element for the adult ed and bridge program apprenticeship component, again, kind of drawn from WIOA, that you can assure that it enables an individual to attain a secondary school diploma or its recognized equivalent. So looking at that equivalency opportunity. And at the credit-bearing post-secondary, the second element there, looking at how is it supporting an individual to address their remedial education needs if they're not quite ready for those credit-bearing courses. And then the third element for both of those is the same. So how are there both articulated and efficient linkages for pursuit of further post-secondary education, with 2 distinct concepts there that we thought are important. That they're articulated, it's transparent, that students within the pathway can understand how they can move, say, from that first recognized post-secondary credential degree to another credential within that sequence, and that they're efficient and that they're not losing credit or having to duplicate work that they did before as they continue to pursue work within that pathway. So again, as we did before, we will pause for digestion and then open up the poll.
And like I just posted a message to all of you in the chat box, I think it's great. We're seeing responses from across the field, K-12, secondary, post-secondary, various state agencies, advocates, community-based organizations, adult ed representatives. So keep it coming, and I kind of played on words, make sure that your sector is representative as you're adding comments. So I'm now going to open the poll so you can share your opinion on the draft core element of progressive design. All right, so we'll just take a few more seconds. The chat box keeps popping. The responses are coming in. It looks like there's just a few more people. If you could give your response. Love it, hate it, needs a little work, needs a lot of work. Give us our marching orders. Okay, last call, and I'm going to skip to the results. All right. Well, we haven't gotten anybody to say they hate something yet. Maybe you're just all too polite. But definitely a mix. It seems like many folks think this needs a little work, a couple think it needs a lot of work, and a few of you love it. So we will definitely take a look. And I really encourage, for anybody who doesn't love it or didn't reply to the poll, speak now. We really want your input on the little work. Is it tweaking? Is it clarifying verbiage, or is it fundamentally the philosophy of the core element of progressive design? Okay, I'm going to switch back for John to the next draft core element.
Great, and again, just looking through the comments, some incredibly helpful comments that we saw from the last round, so please keep it going. So for career-focused instructions, now we're really diving into how participants are experiencing the pathways work. Generally the career-focused instructional sequence relates to real-life situations and experiences, focuses on the application of learning, and integrates academic and technical content with foundational professional skills. As we look at the criteria here and how we have it set out, so at the secondary level, what we're stating for this first element, the expectation that the career-focused instructional sequence would include at least 2 years of coursework or equivalent competencies that articulate to post-secondary programs offering dual credit where possible. And this is one element that we've drawn from a lot of the discussions around House Bill 5729, which recently passed both chambers of the General Assembly for college and career pathway endorsements on high school diplomas, that had a specific component around career-focused instruction, which sort of brought in the discussion and work within that for this definition here. For the second element with secondary, the concept that it shouldn't just be about career-focused coursework standing on its own, but there needs to be strategies to think about how academic and technical content are integrated, whether that's with cohort scheduling at the high school level, whether that's with common training and PD across academic and CTE instructors, but those types of strategies need to be in place. And that also that, importantly, staff are receiving training to ensure quality delivery of the career-focused instruction, particularly being able to engage directly with employers around that training. For the Adult Ed Bridge program and apprenticeship work, and also for the credit-bearing post-secondary, again, I'll sort of do these in parallel. But the first elements here are the same for both. The expectation that participants through that instruction would be attaining competencies or preparing them for entry-level employment or advancement within an in-demand occupation or cluster with living wages. So the concept that they are being directly prepared for those entry-level employment positions. Secondly, for For the second element, again, kind of in parallel, that pathway contextualized instruction would be used, including in the adult ed and bridge programs and others for that GED equivalency instruction. That would be contextualized appropriately, as well as for credit-bearing post-secondary work, that pathway contextualized instruction would be used for remedial coursework as well. And the last element, again, around faculty and staff training is the same for both, that they are being appropriately trained in those career-focused components and on the current industry trends within that area. So, again, we will pause for more reading and reflection, and then move to our poll.
Excuse me. Yeah, I received a few comments or requests in the chat box just asking to leave this one up for an extra minute. And obviously, it goes without saying, as you review the document and you log off the webinar today, and you're driving home or taking the train or walking to lunch and you think, I got to let John and Mary Kay know XYZ, shoot us an email, send us a note, give us a call. I'll leave this up just for a little bit longer, and then we're going to open the poll. And so as you're thinking and you're adding your comments to the chat box, again, are there elements about this that you love, you fundamentally disagree with, you hate it, needs a little work, or needs a lot of work? Okay. All right, just take another second and please give your response. It looks like just a couple more folks. Love to hear your opinion. Last call. All right. Okay. So again, continue to add specifics for all the folks who are letting us know that it needs a little work or it needs a lot of work. Be as specific as possible. A few people have sent notes saying that they have very specific feedback and they'd rather discuss by phone or in a separate email. That is cool. We will follow up with you. But if you have a very specific point that you want to offer right now, feel free, and then we will switch to the next element. Okay.
Great. So we will move on now to work-based learning. It's the concept that all pathway participants should be engaging in a personalized and coordinated continuum of work-based learning experiences that's designed to help them master and demonstrate academic, technical, and foundational professional skills. And this is one area where, particularly if you do have the printout of the front and back two-pager, we've defined some of the terms that are here by footnotes, so I would encourage you to take a look at that as we're going through this. But at the secondary level, we're saying for the work-based learning continuum is that there should be one of each of the following experiences. So having a career exploration activity, such as a job shadow, a career exposition, employer site visit, etc. There should also be a team-based challenge, so a group problem-based learning project that relates to a pathway focus area that's important to employers, and a supervised career development experience, which, again, it's a term that's sort of drawn from some of the HP 5729 work, which would include authentic and relevant work experience relating to a pathway area, such as an internship, or school-based enterprise, or cooperative education, or research apprenticeship. When we move to the adult ed, bridge, and apprenticeship work and credit-bearing post-secondary, again, the same criteria here is proposed for both, that there be at least one supervised career development experience or a team-based challenge that offers similar workforce preparation and employer exposure as a supervised career development experience. And really thinking here about models where we've been exposed to where employers are working directly with teams around a team-based challenge where it's very akin to what an individual might have through an internship experience, wanting to make sure that would be considered as we consider the role of work-based learning within these programs. So again, we will pause here for reflection and provide opportunities for comments.
Okay. So I am going to open the poll to get your opinion on work-based learning. All right, almost everyone has responded. As the responses are coming in, I do want to make a comment. I've seen more questions coming in the chat box on this one. And so I wonder, John, do you want, I think most of the input in the chat box has been comments or suggestions, other resources, and it seems like there have been a couple very specific. So I don't know if you want to take a minute and just clarify. So one question is, here, you know what, let me skip to the results. We can go back to the slide. Okay, so likewise, and I can see people's specific comments coming in. Let me go back to work-based learning. So one question was, would a classroom team project count even if no employer or workplace involvement? For example, a simulation of workplace challenges.
At least, again, and this is, if we go to some of the definitions that we have proposed here, is the idea that there would be some mentoring and engagement from adults that have expertise in that particular area that's addressed by the challenges, and that it would be relevant to employers. So I think if there was a project that had no employer engagement, even in sort of a mentoring role, that's not what we would be focused on for this type of definition. But again, I also think that these comments are very helpful to lead to questions where either we need to think about things differently or to think about how we can be more specific as we drill down on this. And I think what we've always understood, this is with the first element, that we're going to need to get more specific with many of the definitions that are part of this work.
Great. Yeah. And I think one of the questions had been about examples, but then you had offered some of the examples of what work-based learning means.
Right.
Okay.
Great.
Well, I also see, I think some of the most recent comments that just came in are also concerns, sort of concerns of inclusion and placement, and so I think this will be...
Yeah, and let me speak to that just a little bit. And one thing where we'd love to get some comments back on this as well is that as we think about a scan of career pathway programs, we also think that there might be some elements which are required and you absolutely have to have. So maybe some of the partnerships have to be in place. The sector focus that has to be there. For the work-based learning, we may say if you have a work-based learning approach, but you have certain gaps in your model, that could be something we could survey and provide information on, but potentially still include some of those programs in the scan. And I'll be honest, we haven't. These are things we're still working through, and would love the input from all of you about how to think about that. That it doesn't necessarily have to be an approach where it's either you're in or you're out. It could be one where for those that are in, we think for some elements where we can have somewhat of a gradation about how we're looking at the elements. Yep.
All right. Let's move to the next core element.
Great. So for participant supports, there's a need for pathway participants to have access to supports that help their successful navigation of the pathway and entry into the career field. And this is another one where I'm really going to read across, because there's a lot of similarities and across these three areas. So the first area, important role of advising at the secondary level, both academic and career advising, as we think about moving up the continuum, supporting more career navigation and advising, and then direct referrals to the workforce. As we look at the second element, it's the same across all programs, that all participants would be supported to prepare and update, at least annually, an individualized plan for their education work and career and financial aid. That's something that regardless of what stage you're at, you should have that plan in place that's supporting participants to know where they're going. And lastly is a little bit of a catch-all. So additional comprehensive supports that are made available as needed to participants, understanding that at all level, students and adults and others will have challenges for being able to access instruction and the programs and work-based learning, whether that's transportation, whether that's childcare. The idea here is not to have a list necessarily that says you have to have all these specific supports, but just saying that programs need to have gone through a thoughtful process about what types of supports are needed for their particular population. So, and one thing I think we're interested in drilling in the survey is getting a better understanding of what are the types of supports that are out there from an informational perspective. Great. Well, again, we'll give folks time to reflect.
Okay. Feel free to start entering your comments or questions or concerns into the chat box. And I'm going to flip from the slide to the poll to get your opinions on this draft core element. And at this point, you know the drill. Responses are coming in. All right, I'll leave the slide open. Just a few more. We love to get everyone's opinion on each element. Right. Last call. Okay, thanks folks. The comments keep coming in. Okay. So we've definitely hit our rhythm on needing a little work. Thank you. It's called job security. So we'll have a lot to dig in and follow up.
Yeah, I would actually be troubled if there wasn't any little work for many of these. That would mean that you're paying attention.
I might wonder if you were actually reading the document. No, so it's good. And clearly, I mean, very specific comments, very pointed questions coming in the chat box. So it is obvious that you are reading and thinking all in real time. Okay. So now we're going to move, we just have a couple more last core elements to review and a couple more polling questions before we move to our conversation on information sources.
Great. So the last two elements, measurement and sustainability, really get to this issue of ongoing viability of pathway programs. So from a measurement standpoint, pathway programs should include quantitative and qualitative evaluation of participation and outcomes with a focus on equity. And there's a lot of similarity across our specific criteria here, just to really point out where we had one distinction in this first element. So at the secondary level, we feel that the measurement system needs to include measures of post-secondary outcomes. I think aspirationally and goal-based, we'd love to see employment outcomes for secondary programs, but at least in our experience, we think that's a stretch too far currently with where the work stands. For adult ed bridge and apprenticeships and credit rank post-secondary, though, that should be an expectation that there are measures of employment outcomes that are included within those programs. And for all programs, that there needs to be this focus on equity of both participation, so who is engaged, who's involved, and also looking at that outcomes data through the lens of gender, demographics, and socioeconomic status. That those components would be brought into the analysis and would tie into the measurement system. So again, we will provide for reflection.
Okay, so I will flip this slide. I'm seeing some comments come in about also including transitions to post-secondary for adult education. There are a few of us on this phone that have had those conversations over the years, so recognizing that addition. All right. We'll leave the poll open just for a few more seconds. It looks like there's just a few more of you. We'd love to get everyone's opinion.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and one of the things that the comments that I think that we need to we'll need to think through, the goal for this project isn't necessarily to say that we want every pathway program in the Chicago region to be using the same metrics for outcomes. I think that's really too ambitious for what the scan is intended to do. I think more it's supposed to be getting at, we think measurement is sort of a core expectation and requirement, and we want to see reflected how these approaches are being used. I mean, I think part of this work will be a real effort around information gathering and even understanding what kinds of employment outcomes might be utilized, and what are some of the innovative models that are out there to obtain that. So that's just one clarification that I wanted to make. I know we're getting some comments that are very specific about a very specific metric, and obviously if you're funded through WIOA, then you're going to have to be using the WIOA performance metrics, of course. But for purpose of our scan, I think more it's getting at this issue of, again, what does the landscape look like and how is this being approached?
All right. Yeah, so as John was adding those points, more comments were coming in the chat box. And especially so there's definitely been sort of questions gaining steam, and I think we'll do our best. If there are very specific questions, this would be a great opportunity for us to schedule a separate conversation with you, or if there seems to be themes of questions that are cutting across the draft core elements, we can also figure out how to, when we're incorporating your feedback, how to reflect back some of those very specific points and try to provide some additional insight.
Yep, absolutely.
Okay.
Great. So the last element around sustainability. So the General expectation that pathway programs would have long-term sustainable funding sources and strategies, and that funding would be aligned across the system to leverage resources. And we'll make your reading process easier by having the same criteria for all three buckets here, generally expecting that there be sustainable funding streams leveraged across partners, and we can talk about in the two-page write-up what we mean by sustainable funding streams, state or federal formula funds, local property tax revenue, other long-term funding sources. And that we also recognize, though, that many pathway programs are grant-supported, and that's great, but there needs to be a plan that exists for sustainability beyond the current period of grant funding.
Okay, I'll leave it up just for another second. Some comments are coming in on sustainability already. We very intentionally included a $ to trigger a conversation that sustainability does involve actual real-life money and not just living green. So let's flip to the poll. And again, as you share your insight, this will be our last poll. Just a few more folks. I'm not seeing as many responses or questions around sustainability, but if you have them, thinking in how we invest in these pathway programs. So just ask for an extra minute. I will grant you that extra minute. Okay, so it looks like most of the responses are in. Okay. So again, this one needs some work, and we'll continue to look at it. It seems like a lot of comments have just come in as you were finishing offering your opinions. Since we're doing really well on time, we'd like to open up the phone lines. And so here's the story, folks. I'm happy to unmute everyone, but now's the time to put your dog outside, stop washing dishes, make sure your phone is on mute if you're somewhere loud, and please don't put us on hold, because that is the worst party crash ever when you're on a webinar and somebody's crazy classical music busts in. So that is my final friendly warning. And then why don't we unmute the lines, and we'll just do our best. It's an intimate group of 20 people, so let's see if we can have a manageable conversation.
Yes, thanks.
The conference has been unmuted.
And what we wanted to do at this point in time, we didn't want to do this before we walk through the elements, but where we do want feedback, either written or feel free to speak up as we walk through. I mean, what's your general thoughts about how we've done in terms of capturing the right core elements? We know that we've got work to do within each of them to get them to the right place. We appreciate that there were no haters, but we also totally appreciate the fact that we do have work to do from our starting point. But we'd love to get general comments, again, written, or if folks want to speak up, just your general sense. Again, do we have the right 8? Does it seem like the right structure? How do we do in thinking about kind of pathways across the different areas of focus from secondary to post-secondary?
And please just identify yourself before you start speaking.
Again, feel free to chat if you don't want to speak, but does anyone want to be bold and speak up?
Maybe I was too heavy-handed in my muting comment.
This is Amanda Winters from the Illinois Board of Higher Education.
Hi, Amanda.
Hey, I did put a question in the chat box that maybe I thought I'd bring in and allow you to give us some feedback about your thoughts. Is there going to be, in your envisioned definition for career pathways, is there going to be any requirement for embedding industry-recognized credentials? Are you going to include that as an element where applicable, or what are your thoughts there?
Yeah, I think that's something that, I think the right place for that would be thinking about within the progressive design. And when we talked about the industry-recognized credentials at the secondary level, but this may or may not have come up within the comments, but I think incorporating specific reference to industry-recognized credentials within the post-secondary and adult ed and bridge would also be appropriate. I mean, I think that's a really good point.
And just because of other conversations I've had in other venues, the question then becomes, what is the definition of industry-recognized? Because I know I use the term all the time, but when I try to actually nail it down, is that just a key employer recognizes it? Is that a whole industry? And how do we define that industry? Is that like the region? Is it something that's really useful in that region, or does it need to be something that's wider? So just kind of some of those thoughts, throwing that out there and brainstorming, I think having those kinds of professional credentials are great. It's just hard for me to kind of nail down what's appropriate for an industry designation.
Well, this is one, where I think that, there's a lot of these areas where I don't think within our scan where we would be in a position to say this is a list of credentials that count and this is the one that doesn't, or that, here's a very precise definition and we'll be making judgments about whether or not what you do kind of does or doesn't. I think probably from a scan standpoint, we'd want to know, do you have industry recognized credentials embedded? And part of the survey would be to understand what those credentials are. So that we can kind of use that information. But I know there's a lot of work at the state level, kind of thinking through that process that we don't want to duplicate and we would want to rely on for thinking about that specific issue.
That's really helpful. Thank you.
Yeah. Any other more general thoughts?
This is Dan Wagner from High School District 214.
Hi, Dan.
So maybe just piggybacking on Amanda's previous comment, sometimes since industry-level credentials were identified at the secondary level, sometimes even just the progress towards that industry-recognized credential. There's some that, just given whether it's age limits, the amount of time necessary to complete that type of credentialing, something that industry would recognize. We can lower the barriers to a student achieving along the lines of their career path.
Hey, Dan, we're having technical difficulties. It's hard to hear you. I wonder if you can step outside or type in chat.
Yeah,
but we kind of lost your last
I'll type in.
Yeah, but Dan, I think I got the general concept, which is a very helpful one, to think that it might not be able to attain the actual industry-recognized credential. Like, I'm familiar with your work thinking about AHIMA, health informatics certifications. You've kind of mapped that out, and it's very difficult to get those certifications while still in high school, but there can be direct progress toward components of it in secondary that can then build into post-secondary. Some of the other comments we got, I know in the chat box, and this was up, which, why don't we have a little discussion on it now, is it appropriate to have that be baseline expectation in high school that all pathways would include industry-recognized credential, or, to Dan's point, progress toward an industry-recognized credential? We seem to have some kind of disagreement and thoughts in terms of those components. So that's one where would love it if people have any thoughts on that they'd like to raise. Would appreciate feedback.
Also, like Carrie Thomas added a comment in the chat. I don't know if you also want to plug in on the phone.
Yeah, I'm here, but I'm running out, so
okay,
I put it in the chat. So go ahead.
Okay, well, why don't I'll say the chat out loud.
Okay.
At the beginning of the webinar, we were referencing the AQCP, the Alliance for Quality Career Pathways, but it seems like some of the elements of AQCP were lost in the draft core elements, particularly participant-focused, multiple entry and exit points, taking time between those points in the pathways, and what are our thoughts about the role of these ideas?
I mean, what I would really appreciate Carrie's thoughts or Judy's thoughts or others is how do we translate those concepts into objective criteria for a scan? I mean, obviously, if you ask any program, are you participant-focused, the response will be yes.
Yeah.
Do you have multiple entry and exit points? I mean, we've tried to sort of think through that in some of the progressive design components, but that is an area where we struggled with. So I would love thoughts on translation of some of those criteria into more or some of those concepts into more specific criteria that we could try to include that would be appropriate for a scan. Because I think that was really the struggle that we had as we worked through those elements.
Yeah, and just an addendum, the Judy that John is mentioning is Judy Mortrude, who was a leader in the workforce system in Minnesota and is now the director of the Alliance of Quality Career Pathways at CLASP. She serves on the advisory board and has been really helpful in conversations leading up to today's webinar. She wasn't able to participate, but I do think it makes sense going back. Because to John's point, I definitely hear you, Carrie, and I'm seeing some of the other points here in how you translate this to a self-assessing survey that folks in the field will have to respond to, and how we try to get the most accurate information as possible. So I do think I hear your feedback in trying to balance a survey tool.
Yeah, and we're involved with some other projects in the pathway space where there's development of sort of quality criteria that can be used for more of a reflection of the degree of implementation of a number of elements or by external reviews in those processes. And we understand that some of the quality assessment aspects are not going to be appropriate for this type of definitional listing for a scan. But this is, again, something where we really welcome input and thoughts about how to strike the right balance for this process.
This is Julie Strong from App Associates, and I was just curious, this is more about kind of next steps. I was curious if when you do your scan of the field, whether you'll be, including or excluding programs based on whether they meet all of these elements of this, comprehensive definition, or will there be, will it be along a spectrum? And I guess I raise it because we're starting to do something similar at the national level in terms of scanning career pathway efforts, and we're finding it pretty challenging to find programs that actually include all of these elements.
Yeah, I think that's an area where we're still thinking through and appreciate thoughts on that. I think where our current thinking is, and two part of the group, is that some elements would be definitely expected to be in place, and others we might say if aspect of an element is in place, that would be included, although we know it might be on the spectrum and they might be working toward it. So that's something where, again, we would love feedback either in the chat box or even emailed it separately to us. If anyone specifically on that point has thoughts about like what has to be core and what maybe should be a little more aspirational or working toward, that would be super, super helpful. Why don't we go ahead, because I want to make sure that we wrap up by 3, and we'll go through the next steps in the process. So, yeah.
Okay. I'm going to mute you all again. You're like the most disciplined group of webinar participants.
The conference has been muted.
My robot just muted you. So thank you. And it's funny, I appreciate Julie piping up because I literally think she used the word aspirational in like 4 of her chat comments. And I was reading them in real time thinking, yes, we know that a lot of this, and some folks have also offered suggestions as far as tiers or levels, so all good feedback. Thanks for everybody who spoke up. So this is just a short list, and we really just wanted to put out some of the initial program sources. So to John's point, the work that we're engaging you on, the end goal is this landscape scan, a document, a website, a tool that we will be able to communicate back to the field to say, here are the questions we asked, here's what we learned, and now we want to share it with you. And to that end, both through just our experience in the field, talking to various folks, and then in the registration questions, this is a snapshot. So I just wanted to leave some of these program sources where we can find programs with whom we'll want to engage. You know, these will be the directories or the lists, the universe of people to whom we'd want to administer our survey and get their feedback on their experience running pathway programs, wherever they fall on the spectrum. So I just want to leave this slide up for a minute and would ask you, like we've done before, if there are specific people, so first name, last name, email, phone number, that you think, you know, who you need to talk to learn more about pathway programs in the Chicagoland region, dump it in the chat box. If there are other websites, directories, systems.
Yeah, and Mary Kay, just to claim, we're not looking for connections to a particular program. We're looking for people who can connect to listings of lots of programs. So.
Yep, exactly. So we'll just leave this slide up for a minute, and then we're on point for wrapping up in the next few minutes.
Yep. Yeah, and this is another area, you all were great with your initial survey responses, and we've got a lot of good leads and websites and emails from that as well that we'll be following up on.
I also appreciate a few of you are posting saying that we can contact you directly, so we appreciate that. A few folks are sharing links and names of people. Okay. So feel free. We're just going to be wrapping up the webinar in the next couple of slides, so I know you're all multitaskers. So as we're closing out, feel free to continue to put other people and information sources with whom you think we should connect. Oh, so here are the next steps. So we're meeting today. It's July 28th. We have a lot of feedback from you guys. Between the registration questions, we'll have the recording of the webinar, your input on the polls, and then obviously all of the rich content you have shared in the chats. And we will be incorporating your feedback and figuring out the best and most efficient way to follow up with you, because I think quite a few of you had very specific points to offer or very specific questions to us. So we promise that we will be respectful of your time and contact points, and so we'll figure out really efficient ways to make sure that we are understanding and incorporating your feedback to the best of our ability. Likewise, in addition to what we're doing here today, this is great. So people just continue to add points of contact and other insights. We just want you to continue to help us identify the career pathway programs and providers. And I think to Julie's excellent point, anybody that fits along the spectrum, so the high, medium, low threshold that they may or may not meet, it would just give us a chance to administer the survey and then engage them in a further conversation. So we'll be getting, once we refine the survey, and figure out sort of these points of data that we're going to collect, then we'll develop the survey, and then that would be the next point of contact when we would want to reach back out to all of you. So this is just an echo of the earlier slide. So we outline the next steps of our work, and then once that program survey, based on your feedback, is shaped out, then we'll want to re-engage. And like I said at the beginning of the call, most likely this would be a more personalized touch point, but as we're comparing our notes and team capacity and calendars, we'll let you know what makes the most sense. And then obviously once we get the data back and the responses from the field, then we'll be reaching out to you to save a date in October. And with that, I'll let John close out the meeting.
Great. Well, again, we really wanted to thank you all for your time and engagement and your input, both during this initial meeting and going forward from here. I just wanted to reiterate that we'll be reaching out to many of you based on your comments and the information that you provided, and also feel free to reach out to us. I know that if you should have Mary Kay's email directly, and we'll make sure that we can distribute out to others kind of our contact information. But please let us know if there's specific points or concepts you want to talk through, or if you see this project maybe aligning to work you're doing in different ways and you want to brainstorm and think about that. We'd really love to have that discussion, because I know from CWFA's perspective, they don't want this to be just a standalone project for their own purposes. They really want this to be a resource for the broader region, for the state, and for others that are engaged in this work. So we're excited to be a part of it, and just really appreciate your input and time.
Thank you. Thanks, John. Thanks, everyone.